Okay, welcome everyone to Community Group. As we continue in our series, it's all about the heart. This week, we're looking at bitterness, which is like the older cousin of anger that Pastor Trevor looked at last week. And so our focus is bitterness, and then we'll look at the corresponding, the counterflow in forgiveness. Bitterness is the deep feeling of resentment and anger that smolders within us because of a past offense that has been done towards us, and allowed to grow, it can destroy our hearts, destroy our friendships, and turn our friends into enemies. But the most damaging effect of bitterness is the way it destroys the one who's bitter. The book of Esther is like the Bible's tragic comedy, but it highlights the damaging power of bitterness. Haman is an honored official in the courts of King Xerxes, and he loved the way people would honor him and bow down to him, particularly as he walked down the stairs into the courts by the king's gate. But there was one Jew by the name of Mordecai who wouldn't bow down to Haman. And it made Haman burn with anger against Mordecai. He wanted him dead. And as it smolders within him, suddenly just Mordecai being dead wasn't good enough. It needed to be more than that. And so now, it wasn't just Mordecai he wanted dead, but he wanted every Jew he could see to be dead. And so he decides to kill all the Jews. And he sets a day in order to conduct this genocide of his. And when Mordecai and the Jewish queen Esther get to hear about this, they get all the Jews in the city to fast and pray and ask God to intervene. And in the meantime, Haman, all bitter and twisted, builds a 23-meter high gallows on which to hang Mordecai. And I think you get the picture that probably a 3-meter gallows would have done the trick. But when bitterness takes over our hearts, that virus grips our hearts and perspective just goes completely out the window. That same night that Mordecai's been finished building this gallows, the king could not sleep. And so he calls someone to read him some old newspapers. And one of the articles that is read to him happens to be a story where Mordecai had alerted the king to a coup that was happening against him. And consequently, Mordecai saved the king's life. And so the king asked the person to stop reading. He says, "What was done for Mordecai for saving my life?" And the official says, well, nothing, king. And that very moment, Haman comes into the palace to ask the king for Mordecai's head. But the king speaks first, because that's what kings do. And he says to Haman, "What do you think I should do for someone that I'm wanting to honor?" Now Haman thinks that the king is talking about him. How would I like to be honored, he thinks. And so he tells the king this elaborate thing of a pompous procession through the city streets in royal robes, being led on one of the king's horses, with someone shouting, "This is what is done for the man the king desires to honor." So the king goes, "Cool, what you've just said, go and do for Mordecai." Can you imagine? He was coming to get authority to have Mordecai's head, and now he leaves having to lead Mordecai through the streets of the city, shouting, "This is what the king does for the man the king desires to honor." Haman was almost grief-stricken. He was so distraught. And then, after this has all taken place and he's led Mordecai through the streets, he is called to the palace for a meal that has been prepared for him and the king by Queen Esther. And Esther says, the king is so impressed with Queen Esther that he says to her, "Queen, you can have anything that you want." And so the queen says to her, says to Xerxes the king, "King, this man Haman has got a plan in order to kill me and all the Jews. Please can I have my life and all the Jews' lives?" And the king is enraged. And he briefly goes out into his garden to think. And Haman, knowing that his life was in the balance, falls down at Esther's feet and begs her for his life. But when the king walks back in, what he sees is Haman all over Queen Esther. And it looks like, well, at least to him, it looks like Haman is molesting his queen. And so now his goose is truly and solidly cooked. And Haman is hanged on his 23-meter gallows, the very instrument that he had intended for Mordecai. Hollywood couldn't have scripted it even any better. And that's why I call it a tragic comedy. But it highlights so well how our bitterness can be the very thing that destroys us. And it will if we let it. As a group, the first thing I'd like you to talk about after we've gone through this story, where have you seen, what are the stories you know that maybe are personal from your own life, or maybe just hearsay, where bitterness has left a trail of destruction for the bitter person themselves, for the person who was bitter? Chat about that now. Press pause. Okay, as we continue, the next thing I want to say is that no one makes us bitter.